So I know most people come to these kind of events because as a true professional, you should be able to speak in sentences that are strictly acronyms and verbs, so it's important to collect acronyms. So I don't want to disappoint. So you have CANS, let me make sure you get a second acronym, which is TCOM. So that's the name of the framework. So Transformational Collaborative Outcomes Management. Transformation means it's about personal change. That's actually subtle but profound. The difference, as soon as you understand it's about change, it changes things. For instance, let me give you an example. Did you know that the states with the best permanency rates actually have among the worst systems? Because what they do is they just turf out. They take everybody, right? And so if you take everybody, then of course you can return the easy ones easier. And so the really effective systems do a good job at the front door, and they prevent entry into child welfare, but then you're left with the most challenging youth in your child welfare system, which then your return to permanency is actually much harder. So that's a status indicator. That's not a transformation, right? So return to permanency is a status indicator. It's not talking about the change, right? It's not talking about what changed in this person's life that leads you to believe that they're in a better place to raise their kids, right? Okay. Did you know, for those of you who work in mental health, did you know that there's a vast literature demonstrating the people who get the most out of outpatient mental health treatment are the people who need it the least? They even have a name called YAPAS. You know why we came to the belief that the people who get the most out of outpatient mental health treatment are actually the people who need it the least? Is because we use a status at discharge indicator for an outcome. So if you use, are you in the on the normal range? Who's the most likely people to leave treatment in the normal range? The people who start treatment in the normal range. So all that vast literature demonstrates is that nothing happened. All it does. If you actually look at personal change, you know who gets the most out of outpatient mental health treatment? The people who need us the most. But here's the deal, they never get in the normal range, right? They just live their lives a little bit more successfully because they got some help, right? That's the difference between a transformational system and a service system. Collaboration is the second important word. And collaboration, the concept of a collaborative, and the CANS is done as a collaborative, so the whole thing is a collaboration, right? So everything that happens gets shared, so there are literally tens of thousands of people around the U.S. that will give you everything that they're working on. You can have it. It's yours, right? So it's a collaborative. The concept of collaboration is that if the collaborative is successful, then every individual in the collaborative is successful. That's the concept. That's why people join collaboratives, is because they know that if they help work towards a common good, everybody, including them, benefit from that common good, right? The only way a collaborative ever works is if there's a shared vision. So the concept of collaboration here, at the individual child and family level, means engagement, right? At the program level, it means teaming. And at the system level, it means system integration. It's exactly the same concepts, we just use different language across the system to talk about the same basic fundamental issue is let's get everybody together, working together towards a common purpose, and the common purpose should be the best interest of our children and families, right? So that's the concept behind this approach. Which means, for those of you who are Star Health folks, this is a shared visioning approach. If you think people are going to get a referral, you're going to go and do your CANS thing and fill it out and send it in, and then complain because nobody reads it, you're not thinking about it the right way, right? It's in fact a collaboration. So the idea is you take information from the caseworker, and hopefully the structure of that will be the family needs and strengths assessment. You then use your clinical expertise to advance that information, and then you feed the information back to the caseworker because in fact they have the parental responsibilities, and so you're informing them because information is good, and learning how to use information actually helps people be more effective. And that's the concept. That's really easy for me to say. But I'm getting on a plane this afternoon and flying out of here, right? The actually learning how to play well together is the challenge, right? Because sometimes we don't have a long history of that. But that's the idea of collaborative, is we're all in the same business, we all care about kids. Let's work together to be as effective as possible. We all have different gifts, and can we share our gifts to be as effective as possible for the people we serve? That's the idea. Outcomes means it's relevance to the transformational goals. So in child welfare, we're talking about well-being predominantly, and for the CANS. And then management is actually the hard part, which is actually driving it into practice. The easy thing is getting certified on the CANS. That's actually pretty easy. The hard part is actually embedding it in the work, because that actually takes a change. And this is a practice model approach. It's not really a measure. It's a practice model approach, and it does require personal change in order to do this well. Generally speaking, some people do it already exactly like this, but a lot of people don't, and so it forces people to think about things a little bit differently sometimes. So this is no fun. It's not sexy. It's kind of boring. It's engineering. It's grinding. Right? Give you a little flavor. One of my doctoral students was leaving for internship last year. We were chatting, and she said, John, one thing that I really respect about your career is you spent so much of your time doing something that's so inherently uninteresting. Absolutely right. To do this well is grinding. You have your message and you stay on your message, and you repeat the message over and over and over again. So my life is actually like that movie Groundhog Day, right? I'm hoping to get it right eventually, right? Because if that's what it is, you have to stay on message. You have to drive this process, and if you get distracted from that, then it's not going to be as effective as it could be. The strategy, that's all well and good. Let's make it about our kids, but you have to have a strategy. We have all sorts of good ideas that never get fully engineered, and they become the flavor of the month. So the only way you actually make good things happen is you drive it into practice, right? You absolutely have to drive it into practice. That's the strategy. So the cans of the strategy represent the philosophy, and then the tactics are how do you use it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that and show you some examples. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about this, except to say that the CANS is completely different from other kind of measures. So it has 60 characters. It's a communometric measure. It's not a psychometric measure. So most existing measures of well-being come from psychometric theory. The problem with that is that those come from a tradition of research. And I said before that I didn't think we were talking about translating research into practice. I thought we were talking about engineering, right? And there's some problems that develop. So let me see if we can, if I can kind of drill down that comment a little bit more completely. So let's see if we can reach a moment of consensus. Would everybody agree that if our job is helping people, is it true to say, is it fair to say that the first stage of successfully helping people is to understand them? Is that a reasonable statement? Okay, so what you mean by understanding is fundamentally different than what a researcher means by understanding. So if you ask a researcher, they'll tell you, my entire life's work is about understanding. I'm seeking understanding, I'm seeking the clarity that you seek, right? Right? That's what it's about. So what they're telling you is understanding is the output of their work. For helpers, understanding is the input of the work. You actually can't start trying to help until you at least understand something. So when you talk about the word understanding, you're really talking about understanding a little about a lot. Whereas a researcher is talking about understanding a lot about a little. So they go deep, and you need to go broad. And if you try to go broad and deep at the same time, it falls apart on itself, right? Because it's just too much. The way I think about it, I travel constantly, right? So I'm in hotels a lot. So I was here, next week I'm in Boise, Idaho. The week after that I'm in Nevada and New Jersey, and then I'm in Oakland, and anyway. So I travel constantly. You travel this much is not a vacation, so this was not my opportunity to see the sights of Austin. I end up spending time in the hotel rooms all the time. There's nothing to do in a hotel room except work, sleep, or watch TV. So I do watch some TV. Sometimes it's good stuff. Sometimes I get desperate. Have you seen those bodybuilding shows? Now that's truly desperate, right? So to get up on stage, you need to have at least 6 cuts in your abs. And if you're going to be a champion, you need to have 7 or 8 distinct muscle groups in your stomach alone. Now, I don't know about y'all. I look at those folks and I say, you care a little bit too much about your muscle definition. Me personally, I'm looking for gently rounded, and that's good enough. Right? That's the difference between research, which is trying to be buff, and helping people, which is trying to be reasonably fit. You have a completely different standard of information in practice than you do in research, and it's a mistake to apply a standard of information from research into practice. It's simply never going to work, right? So that's why the CANS comes from a completely different theory. It comes from communication theory. It's a communometric measure. If you want to know more about it, email me. I will send you the PDF of the book called Communometrics. It's particularly good if you have a sleep problem. So anyway, so you're welcome to it. You can also download it from the Parade Foundation site. You can download it from the training website. It's there. It's wherever you want to be if you want to read about it. Chapter 5 is the history of and implementation of the CANS, so it might be useful, interesting for you. Anyway, so this is where the 6 characteristics come from, because the concept of communication is you're trying to create a common language framework. And so the basic concept is what's relevant, what's timely, and what's the shared vision, right? That's the idea. That's what those things are, is how do you create a shared vision and make the information relevant and timely. That's all that stuff is. So the first item is you're only including items that are relevant, and each item could lead you down a different pathway for treatment planning. The second is that it's action level. So the key to the cans is that every number has immediate meaning, so you don't actually need to score it anyway if you don't want to know what it means, because every single item rating has immediate meaning. It's a non-arbitrary measure, unlike psychometric measures. The third characteristic, that actually 3, 4, and 5 are about shared visioning. So shared visioning is you want to make it about the person, not about the person in care. To give you an obvious example, if you've got a young person who runs away all the time and they violate their probation and you put them in locked detention for 30 days, are you resolving their runaway? No, you're stopping them from running, right? So in a traditional measurement, you say, I see no evidence of runaway behavior in the last 30 days. But that would be nonsense, wouldn't it? So this is a different approach. This is saying the only reason they're not running is they can't run. And as soon as those doors swing open, all the factors that are leading them to run in the first place come back into play. This is why the Star Health caseworker model might be really effective, because you have the capacity to teach caseworkers a little bit more sophisticated clinical thinking if you choose to take that opportunity. I hope you choose to take that opportunity, because that's how you create effective systems. Because we all have our responsibilities, and the best way to meet your responsibilities is to have information that helps you do that. Okay. You need to consider culture and development before you apply the action levels. That's also a shared visioning, because it's a common language, but you want to be culturally sensitive. You also want to be developmentally sensitive. So and the last one that's about the shared visioning is it's about the what, not about the why. And that's because two things, right? You want to make sure you're reaching a consensus. So this is a consensus-based tool, which includes families and youth. So the places who do this really well is they do convenings either literally or sequentially, and they get everybody on the same page, including youth and foster parents and biological parents, everybody. So a lot of people use this in child-family team kind of models to have this as the output of the teaming process, right? Which makes good sense, right? So, and that's the reason for this particular characteristic about the what, not about the why, is it's a lot easier to reach a consensus about the what than about the why. It's also, the other reason for this one is because a fully engineered system, what, why, how, what. What's going on in the life of the child and family? Why do we think this is? How are we going to address it? And then you check back in onto the what to see whether or not you're successful. So I think in your design, the Star Health folks, really important in establishing a clear what, but also important in getting to that why, because the only way you can actually make a good plan is to convert the what into a why, so that you prioritize based on the why. Because you could have a 3 on school attendance because which would mean a dangerous or disabled level of school attendance because you're truant, and you could have 1 because you're expelled. Those are 2 completely different reasons why, and you can have a different plan based on that theory of why, right? One is you have to manage the behavior, the other is you have to manage the alternatives to not attending school, right? Okay. And then the last one is a 30-day rating period, and that's just to keep it fresh. And the way the 30 days works is it relevant in the last 30 days? Not did it happen in the last 30 days? So that's what this grid is. This is an example of tactics. So I always tell people there's one answer to every single question when it comes to the cans, and that is it depends. Because it's a highly contextualized approach. So as you can see, it's pretty subjective, right? Is it subjective if you read through those characteristics? Is that a bad thing? Some people might have learned in graduate school that subjective means unreliable. If you learned that, you were lying to you. Subjective means judgment is involved. Judgment is required. You can't do the cans without thinking. You know what we're learning? Thinking is good, right? You actually do better work if you think than if you think this is a plug and play, you're wrong. It's not a plug and play approach. It's a practice model approach. It's designed to facilitate improved work, which requires people to in fact think. But let me tell you a story about this objective-subjective thing. So I got my PhD in 1981, so I'm old. So for those of you, some of you probably weren't born then, but some of you might remember that 1981 was the halcyon days of behavioral assessment. That's how I was trained. I was trained that the truth is in the behavior. Everything else was called epiphenomenon, right? If you want to know the truth, look at behavior. Everything else is just stuff human beings create because they have this need to explain stuff, right? So that's how I was trained. That's how I did my dissertation. I published in a prestigious journal. Alan Kasdan was the editor. He said this is groundbreaking. I'm sure he'd like to take that back. Too late, I have the old letter, right? So here's what I was able to demonstrate. I was able to demonstrate that depressed people in the hospital, as they got better, they moved their arms more in the lunchroom. Does anybody care? You can look it up. It's evidence-based, right? It's highly objective. Oh, look. They move their arms. Oh, we can all agree they move their arms, right? It's highly objective. But wouldn't you agree it's rather trivial? You know what the backstory was? They were eating. Depressed people lose their appetite. When they get less depressed, their appetite returns. In a hospital, you're only actually allowed to eat in the lunchroom. So, and watch at lunch, most people don't go face plant, they actually move the food in their mouth. So yes, in fact, they're moving their arms. But as it turns out, the behavior is epiphenomenal. The truth is actually in the meaning. I'll give you another example. This is actually evidence-based. This is clear research finding. What's the most violent programming on TV? This is clear. Research is clear on this. What's the most violent program on TV? Anybody know? Cartoons. That's exactly right. Why do we know that cartoons are the most violent program on TV? Because here's how we define violence on TV. We take the number of violent behaviors, we observe it, we take a segment of the program, and we count the number of times violent behaviors happen. So here's a thought problem for you. You have a vulnerable person who, if exposed to violence, might become violent. Which would you rather have them watch? Wile E. Coyote trying to drop an anvil on the roadrunner, somehow missing and having the anvil come back around and striking Wiley on the head, the objective violence, or Criminal Minds, which actually never shows actual violence. They always set up an incredibly sick situation, and that show is sick. And then they cut just as soon as they're right to the violence, right? So which would you rather have, a vulnerable person watching the objective violence or the subjective violence? The key is, we live in a subjective world. Subjectivity is a good thing. You can't be culturally sensitive and not be subjective. You can't be person and environment and not be subjective. The key is to not pretend we're not subjective. You make judgments every single day you work. That's a good thing. The key is, don't make judgments about people without their full participation. Consensus. And don't make judgments that don't matter. Transparency. And you do those two things, you end up with the most reliable approach in the field. And the audit reliability of the cans is higher than any existing research measure because it matters. It becomes the common language of how people talk to each other. As soon as you create those two things, consensus and transparency, then it's going to work really well for you. But that's actually some work. It's easy to say and hard to do. Okay? All right. The concept of this approach is, once you have that shared vision, what do you do with it? So the concept of this grid is there's 4 inputs to every choice you make. Information, theory, divine inspiration, right? And intuition. God's not the you're probably the best, but most of us don't have that level of consistent input, so that leaves us with information, intuition, and theory. There is no unified theory of human behavior. Making theory-based decisions is probably an exceptionally bad idea. Probably the most famous bad theory, bad decision is Bruno Bettelheim, who actually was down the street from where my office is, at the orthogenic school at the University of Chicago, who refused to allow parents of children with autism to visit them for the first 6 months of treatment because in Bruno's theory, those parents were causing the autism, and Bruno had to detox those kids for at least 6 months with his own love before he could deign to allow the parents back in the lives of their own children. We use the cans in the autism sector in Ontario. You know what the #1 strength of kids with autism actually is? Family, right? Bad theory, bad decision. So that leaves information and intuition. The vast majority of people will make the vast majority of their decisions based on intuition. And I guarantee you, good gut is a powerful thing. But here's what you should always remind yourself about intuition. Intuition is overly influenced by vivid experiences. And what's vivid in our work? Problems. Problems are by far and away the most vivid. So let me tell you 2 stories. So they implemented TCOM at the hospital where I was affiliated in Ottawa before I even moved there. And believe it or not, people didn't want to do it. I know that's shocking, but people don't want to do it. And one more piece of paperwork, right? And so there are literally thousands of reasons not to do this kind of thing. There's only one reason to do this. It's the right thing to do, but there are literally thousands of reasons not to do it. And so their reason not to do it is they were experienced staff, right? And there was people at the hospital who had been working there for 20 years, right? Because it's a pretty stable environment, it's a good place to work. And so they said, we've been doing this for 20 years. What possible value would it be for us to use a common assessment strategy? We already know our kids. We've been doing this forever. So the clinical director, smart lady, now she may not be that smart because she married me, but she's pretty smart, right? She said, okay, I'll make you a bet. If you can successfully predict the top 3 needs of kids coming into the hospital in Eastern Ontario, you've proven that you know your kids, you don't have to do this. So they took that bet, they knew their kids, right? So they picked, this is a tertiary care psychiatric hospital, you might pick the same thing. They went with psychosis, suicide, endangered others. They ran the camps for 2 months. You know what they found? You know what the number 1 need of kids coming into the hospital in Eastern Ontario actually was? Sleep. What's vivid? Crazy and dangerous is vivid. After 20 years, what do you think you do? I deal with psychotic, suicidal, homicidal kids. What's not so vivid? Getting a full night's sleep. Was there any programming for safety? Oh, you bet. Was there any programming for the treatment of major mental illness? Yes, for both parents and for youth. Was there any programming for sleep? No, unless you consider Benadryl at bedtime programming. So for those of you who work in residential treatment, you know what I'm talking about. Why? Well, here's how they designed their programs. They got together their experienced staff who knew their kids, and like moths to flame, you're drawn to the vivid experiences, and the stuff that's under the radar screen just goes right under it, right? So information is good. Let me give you another example. If you're a direct care person, what do you take to your supervisor? Problems, right? If you learn nothing else from today, that's the most important thing to learn. It's not the crime, it's the cover-up, right? So if there's a problem, you better run it upstream, right? What does the supervisor take to the program director? Bigger problems. What does the program director take to the agency director? Still bigger problems. When does the agency director contact the board of the state? Really big problems. So here's what happens in all systems. The information, as it goes up the chain, gets filtered to be more and more about problems. And so people at the system level can tell you everything that's wrong with the system, and they're hard-pressed to tell you what's right with the system because they get no information about routine successes. We do more good than not. We do more good than not. But nobody ever talks about the good. So what happens is the bad stuff gets filtered, right? And then it ends up in the newspaper and everything else, right? So most people say information is good. So the concept of this grid is information is the best way to make decisions. So there's basically 3 types of applications of information. Decision support, what are you going to do? Outcome monitoring, is it working? Quality improvement, can I do it better? And there's actually applications of the CAMs for all 3 of those uses of information at all the levels of the system. So this is a simple grid, so it's got 3 levels. It's got the individual child and family, it's got the program and the system, right? But you can get more nuanced if you want to, but that's the simplest version of the grid. And so there's actually applications in every cell of the grid that are different from each other. So the service planning, I think you're calling it here, is decision support at the individual level. And there are models that have been developed, we'll go through that in training and so forth, that allow you to shift from the what to the why to create a prioritized plan to help the plan be as effective as possible, meet the needs of that child successfully. And that's just creating a theory of why with the plan, with the what. Decision support at the program level, well, those are algorithms, those are models that are decision support to decide about level of care, placement. There's a bunch of those around. This is a very different approach. It's not arbitrary metrics, right? So it's not like a psychometric measure where you get norms and then you have cutoffs based on T-scores and so forth. This is based on actual complexity indicators, so the logic is called Boolean, and so it's patterns of actual needs, and so there are actually real differences between kids at each of those suggested levels, and we now have established in independent research in 4 different states the reliability and validity and utility of these kind of decision models. You actually have better outcomes if you make decisions based on kids rather than letting the system make decisions based on other priorities, right? So not particularly surprising, I suspect. Decision support at the system level is resource mapping. I'm going to show you a quick example from one of my colleagues at Chapin Hall. So this is the state of Illinois. So with the action levels of the CANs, you can actually analyze stuff in a different kind of way. So this is looking across the behavioral health indicators. So they have about 10 different behavioral emotional needs, and so the items, the action levels are no evidence, watchful waiting, prevention, action, immediate or intensive action. So this is asking, does the young person have any actionable behavioral health needs? So a 2 or a 3 on any one of those 10 behavioral emotional needs, right? That would qualify them for suggesting that a treatment would be indicated, right? That's how this works, right? There's a clear link between what are you going to do and what is the needs of the child, right? So it goes all action-oriented. So this is then, you take those kids who are the children in child welfare who have an actionable behavioral health need and map them based on the location in foster care. So those blue dots are actual children living in Illinois who have a actual need in behavioral health, where we need to serve them in the behavioral health system. They're living in child welfare, they're in foster care. There are Medicaid providers who are willing to take children in child welfare who have the capacity to address behavioral health, behavioral emotional needs. Do you see where there's some problems? So everybody wants to work in Chicago, right? That's that upper right-hand place. So we don't really have an access issue in Chicago. But take a look down in Randolph County, which is just south of East St. Louis. See that those red spots tend to be in the urban areas, and as you get away from the urban areas, you got some real problems in terms of access to care. And this is done by Mike Steele, who's a colleague of mine at Chapin Hall. He also did an analysis that demonstrated the distance between the front door of the foster home and the front door of the clinic directly predicted clinical outcomes. Right? So access does matter, right? It does matter. So anyway, anybody know Illinois at all? You see that big blue dot straight south of Chicago? It's about an hour and a half drive. Anybody know what that is? Why would there be a concentration of children with behavioral emotional needs in that one location? No? Good guess, though. I'm from a competing university. Oh, I got my PhD. There's a city, if I tell you the name of the city, you'll know exactly what's there, I suspect. The name of the city is Joliet. There's a prison there. So there's a prison, and in a concentric circle around the prison, there's a large number of kids in foster care with behavioral emotional needs. Look where the providers are. There's nobody, right? There's nobody in that. So if you're going to invest in building a system that's effective for kids, you need to consider that, right? So that's where you would put those investments. So that's an example of how you use this kind of approach to right-size the system based on kids and not based on who gets the money. Or you decide who gets the money based on kids. Is probably a fairer way to say that. So outcomes monitoring, those are transitions across the system. One child, one can. So the first CANS is really, really important. As you go through multiple CANS, you're just checking in on them, right? You're not redoing an assessment. The CANS is not actually an assessment. It's the output of the assessment process. And so once you do the first one, if you do a good job of the first one, it's literally very easy to update it because you're just saying what's changed, what's newly discovered, and so forth, right? The outcome monitoring, for those of you who are providers, right, so you could view this, and a company, you have choices, right? Choices are powerful and important. So you could view this as unfunded mandate, and you could view this as an opportunity, right? So a lot of people view it as an opportunity. You can actually use this to meet your other business needs. If you're a provider, you might have some needs to do program evaluation. You can actually use this to do your program evaluation activities if you so choose, right? So, and you can do outcomes with that. So there's a bunch of different ways to do it. I don't think I'm going to take it's sort of interesting. We'll see if there's questions about it. I'll show you an example. There are performance contracting strategies that are used with this, because as you begin to wrap your head around the fact that much of our work is transformational, then you want to value transformation, right? That just makes logical sense. You don't want to value, because in valuing time spent, I don't know if you think about this from a behavioral health perspective. If you think about it, mental health providers are actually incentivized in our current system to make people as messed up as you can make them and keep them as messed up as long as we can possibly keep them that way. That's how, I'm not saying that's how people work. I'm saying that's how the system is structured. That's a disaster for us because it forces us to consistently prove what we're doing is ineffective in order to justify continued investment. It's a disaster, right? So we have to fix that, right? Because we do good, right? And we need to be able to see where we do good and invest in that. And so shifting to a transformational process is a very good idea from that perspective. Case management. So if you think about what the caseworker actually is, the caseworker is in fact a quality improvement intervention at the individual child level, right? Because what you want an effective case manager is bringing everybody together to work together towards the common purpose of the best interest of children. So giving caseworkers the skills and the tools that they need to be successful is in fact an aspect of this approach. And there's a bunch of work around the country on that stuff. Program redesign and so forth. Anyway, I gave you an example from the hospital. And then ultimately this is about system transformation, right? Ultimately that's what this is really about, is that transformation at the system level. So, which is really probably shifting the business model so that we're actually creating incentives in the system that are congruent with, how many times have you had the experiences you have the business model and then you have the work and you're trying to wedge the work into the business model and it doesn't really quite make sense, right? So the idea of this approach is let's first understand the work and then create business models that support the work rather than trying to wedge good work within a business model that actually detracts from that good work. So that's the concept of the approach. So I'm going to stop at that point. As you might have noticed, my voice is strained a little bit. So just to tell you a quick story, when my daughter was a teenager, she used to say to me sometimes, "Dad, stop talking." And I always saw that as a certain motivation on her part, but now I've discovered that actually she was concerned about my vocal health. So I think I probably should stop talking. And I also want you to have an opportunity to ask any questions that you might have. So let me stop here and open it up for questions. Yes? Right. Yeah, okay, I'll give you two examples. If you're working with a young person who murdered somebody last year, would you be worried about their safety around others? Yeah. Now, they didn't murder anybody in the last 30 days, right? But they murdered somebody, right? That's something that sticks with you in terms of a risk factor, so you have complete permission to say, because of the nature and severity of what they did, I continue to remain concerned about people's safety around them. Or here's another example. My favorite example is, let's say you got a young guy who's got a drinking problem. And he drinks and drives his car, he crashes it, and ends up in the hospital in a coma for 90 days. And let's say you're charged with helping him plan his post-hospital care. Or you can say, "Hey, he's been clean and sober for 90 days. I'm not worried about that alcohol. He's been in a coma," right? And unless he's got some seriously enabling nursing staff, he has not touched a drop of alcohol for 90 days. That means nothing, right? Wouldn't everybody in the world agree this guy's 3, a dangerous or disabling substance use problem, and your priority as he's coming out of the hospital is to address that, to make sure he doesn't drink and drive and kill himself or somebody else? So you have complete and total permission to make him a 3 because that's what represents him. So that's how that works. It's what's relevant in the last 30 days, not did it happen in the last 30 days. Because it's also, that's particularly important in foster care because you get that honeymoon, right? So your move kids, you put them into foster care and they look like angels for about a month, and then they start getting comfortable and you start seeing them, right? And so it's important to talk about them and not them in a structured setting. So it's one of the reasons why you get chemical restraint with in residential treatment, right? How do you get a good outcome from a behavior, acting out behavior? You medicate, right? And then they don't act out. But is that actually treating this? No, it's suppressing it. That's not real treatment. That's not a personal change. That's why residential treatment programs have moved away, increasingly the progressive ones, from token economies and behavior management strategy, because those don't translate to the community. They don't. So we know we can control behavior. That's not the relevant question. The question is, what are they going to be like when they come out of the residential facility? So there's a bunch of examples where those two characteristics about the child and about the child in care and the 30 days fit together nicely to make it representative of what people need and not anything else.
Is there a way in the cans to distinguish trauma of removal? For instance, if the child in the past 30 days says they're suicidal, but before they were removed they weren't suicidal, does the can distinguish that it could be the removal itself, the intervention that is made?
Yeah, the cans itself doesn't. The process of converting the cans in the plan gives you the possibility to do that, right? Because that begins to be the why, right? So the cans are just the what. So you would have disruptions in caregiving and suicide as 2 different identified needs on your cans. And in a good, I'm pointing to you because I know you're a clinical supervisor, a good theory of why would suggest there's a relationship between those 2. And if that's your theory of why, then you're going to address the adjustment of trauma secondary to the disruption in caregiving as a way of addressing the suicide, right? So that's how that works, is you're creating that theory. And the way that the theory works is so the theory, you divide all the actual needs into background needs, things you can't change but you need to know about. So the disruption in caregiving you can't change, you need to know about it. Treatment targets are what you think are the causes, and anticipated outcomes are the effects, and then the strengths are either useful strengths or strengths to build. So everything has implications for how you then move from the cans into the plan, and that's where that theory would be. One of the tough things for clinicians to do is stop themselves and do the what before they get into the why. Because lots of people jump to the why because that's the sexy stuff, but you have to establish the what first, because otherwise you're going to get misled and you'll underestimate the value of what we do also if you don't establish the what first. So sometimes it's important to slow down and make sure you get the what established well and then move to the why. What, why, how, what. There's one group, one county, there's sort of a county-based kind of system, and so state-run, county-based, and so there's one particular county, Dane County, which is where Madison, Wisconsin is, which is the smartest people in Wisconsin live there. So they didn't want to do it big time, to the point that they even sabotaged my training. So they told me it had been canceled when it hadn't been canceled. So I'm sitting at breakfast with my wife, and I get this call, where are you? So I was told it was canceled. So I drove, fastest I've ever driven between Chicago and Madison was that particular morning. Got there, did the training, but they didn't really buy it, right? So down the road, they weren't engaged. So as the state started looking at the data, it became clear that there was one particular county whose data looked off. This is called data mining, right? And the data mining is extremely powerful. Did you know that Target can tell which one of their customers is pregnant by just looking at the buying patterns? To the point they have a famous story of a father of a 15-year-old calling up Target to complain about the fact that they're sending baby product advertisements to his 15-year-old daughter, and the next day he called back to apologize because then his daughter told him that she was in fact pregnant. So Target, what that actually means is Target knew the girl was pregnant before her father knew. Data mining is powerful. So Dane County is sitting out here like an outlier. So they called in federal auditors, which happened, right? And so the federal auditors reviewed, came and met with people, and so Dane County folks saw this is our next opportunity to kill the cans, right? Which is there will be people in Texas who want to kill the cans. That's the nature of this kind of stuff, right? And so they saw this as their next opportunity, so they complained to the feds that, you know, we don't like this, and we know it's tied to case rates and so forth, so we just decide what we want to do and we fill this out because we know we have to do it, but we don't think it's helpful, blah, blah. So, and they thought the federal government would step in and say, oh, that's unfortunate about the cans, we need to help you find something that works. Well, the federal government actually knows that this works, so the federal government actually said, actually, Dane County, you are engaging in systematic fraud. Right? And the whole reaction, of course, is different. So they're lucky they just had to do corrective action to fix it. But that's how this stuff works. In a information culture, things are transparent, right? So it becomes real clear if people aren't using this stuff accurately over time. We're having this experience right now in New York. They just started in New York City using the cans. And so we're comparing their rate of detected trauma to everybody else's rates, right? And we're finding that they're actually not doing it, which doesn't reflect on the cans, it reflects on the process of how they're actually doing that work. So you're using this information to guide practice, and that's how you do it. It's once it's out there, once you have it in aggregate, then you can say, okay, is this information real or is this problematic? And if it's problematic, you go in and you fix the information. That's always the first stage, right? And as soon as you start doing that and people know that you're looking, it changes everything, right? Transparency changes everything. I mean, we've seen all these problems with police brutality. That's not because it just happened. That's because it's transparent, right? The famous Chicago case just recently, that's not new, unfortunately. It's transparent though. So now we have an opportunity to stop it, right? Because it's horrible. So that's the idea. Levels, 0 is no evidence, 1 is watchful waiting, prevention, 2 is action, 3 is immediate or intensive action. So this is taking that model and then converting it into actual needs versus not. So 2s and 3s versus 0s and 1s. So that first column, and this is behavioral health needs in this particular table. So this is about 5,000 plus episodes of care and residential treatment, so it's pretty stable estimates. So notice that the first column is the percentage of youth admitted to residential treatment who have an actual need on each of those dimensions. So the number 1 actual behavioral health need in residential treatment in Illinois is anger. So now I've been doing this for 35 years. It used to be oppositional, impulsive, and depression were the top 3. Anger now trumps everything, everywhere. I don't know why, whether that's a reframing or whether we actually have an anger epidemic, which is what I think we actually do have an anger epidemic because you've seen it rise to the top everywhere, right? Anger, number one. 60%. Notice that psychosis, not so common, 11%. So notice, just as a placeholder, adjustment to trauma, 48.5%. The next column is the percentage of youth who enter residential treatment with a 2 or a 3 who leave with a 0 or 1. So we call those resolved. They've had an actual need coming in, it's no longer actionable going out. That's a success on that particular need. So notice that anger, less than half, not great. Notice that psychosis, on the other hand, actually pretty good, right? So 70%, that's actually quite high. And that's because of two things. There's lots of kids who have complex trauma. It gets identified in the community as psychosis, and then when they get into a more intensive treatment, they discover actually this is PTSD in an extreme form and not psychosis. And also then good medication management. So that's what you see, that resolution there. All right. The third column, now the interesting thing about the cans is all change is clinically significant. It's a non-arbitrary tool. Everything has meaning. So moving from a 3 to a 2 is also a success, right? You're moving from a immediate or intensive action, dangerous or disabling, to actual, that's a success. So every change is a success, right? So what you can think about the CANS does is it defines statewide the criteria for meaningful change in youth, right? That's what it does, right? So an improvement is any better. So notice the improved metric is always better than the presenting. Now the fourth column is completely different for the CANS than any other measure. Have you ever had the experience where you met young people and then over time you discovered things about them that you didn't know before? Every other metric forces you to call them getting worse. They may not be getting worse, you might just be understanding them more completely, right? So this metric is young people who enter residential treatment with a 0 or 1, who then leave with a 2 or a 3, and we call that identified, because it's possible that it's just being identified. So just to give you a sense of that, the adjustment to trauma, 48.5%. If you were to look at these same data 5 years ago, it was 24%, or 5 years before this slide was made. Why? What happened? Did we actually traumatize kids more successfully in Illinois? No, what happened is we did a statewide trauma initiative where we trained all foster parents and all community providers to be more trauma informed. As soon as you do that, you know what happens? You do a better job detecting trauma, right? You see it. So no, we think that actual number is going to end up 80%. We actually think that the 48.5 is still missing significant trauma-related sequela. But notice the identified rate is still 22% for trauma. That's why we think it's actually going to be higher. They're still learning about that. Some kids come in without it that actually appears that have that. Notice that psychosis has a very low identified rate, right? So people know about it beforehand. Not particularly surprising. Now, some of those youth who start with a 0 or 1 and end with a 2 or a 3 might actually be getting worse, right? So they might be being identified, but there might be bad things happening in residential treatment. So how do you tell the difference? The way you tell the difference is in the next metric, which is called worsening. So that's kids who enter with a 2 and leave as a 3. You already know it's a need when they come in and they're leaving, it's dangerous or disabling. That's just bad, right? There's no other explanation than that's getting worse. So notice that anger actually has a pretty high rate, whereas anxiety does not, right? Depression, anxiety, kids don't get more depressed, they don't get more anxious, but they do get more angry. So there is some evidence that actually anger can be iatrogenic too, and if you start to break it out by sites, you begin to see some milieus create more anger than others, right? Some milieus are good at managing and resolving anger, and some milieus actually create angrier kids, which is probably not a very good idea, probably. All right, now, see that high rate of identification for depression and the low rate of worsening? You know who those kids are? Those kids are predominantly African American boys. Because what we're learning is that there's a filter on the detection of depression. And if there's a cultural bias, actually, that if you're working with somebody who's different from you culturally, you're more likely to label irritability as oppositionality or a disruptive behavior kind of problem. And so as you get to know kids better, you see that actually that's irritability, that's depression. And so we have a problem with the detection of depression that's culture bound, actually. So kids in the minority being over-labeled as having disruptive behavior disorders, and that's because they're under-labeled as having depression. You treat depression completely differently than you treat oppositional. So that's that phenomenon. That's why you have that high rate of success with conduct disorder. That's the same kids, right? Because what we now know is that you treat depression for kids who have disruptive behavior, the first thing that changes is the disruptive behavior. The depression often ends up an ongoing need that they need to be aware of and to be addressing ongoing, but their behavioral manifestations of the depression go away, come under control. And then the last column is transitioning. That's for the percentage that leave with a 2 or a 3. So that gives you what your post-residential treatment plan needs to look like. So, and then the very last column is not a child-specific number, it's a need-specific number. That's just a net gain, it's a bang for the buck. So it's the first column minus the last column divided by the first column. So of the kids presenting, what percentage resolve? So basically what that metric suggests. So and you see, you're not particularly overwhelmed with the power of residential treatment for resolving behavioral health. It suggests exactly the same thing. The role of an effective residential treatment sector is taking very high-risk kids, stabilizing that risk, and then moving them back into the community fairly rapidly to address their ongoing behavioral health needs. And so if you look at the decision support algorithms with this approach, it's designed to support that we know to be effective practice. So you never put kids who are low functioning in residential treatment because those kids actually get worse. They become the milieu wannabes. They're hanging out with higher functioning, higher risk kids, and they pick up those behaviors. And they actually end up leaving higher risk than they came in because that's how it works. So that's why you manage who you send, and you end up with better, more effective residential treatment that way.